The SCI100GM. Installation, inspection, and repairs. The installation of a redirective crash attenuator can be an intimidating task, but not with the SCI100GM. It comes fully assembled and ready for installation. We would like to take you through the process and leave you confident that you can perform a proper installation. All work should be performed with proper traffic control according to local, state, and federal laws. The first step in installation on a concrete pad is to inspect the concrete for signs of cracking, wear, or other signs of deterioration. If the concrete meets the specifications, you will need to determine the exact location of the attenuator. This is dependent on what your transition is attaching to, the flow of traffic, or the obstruction you are protecting. Mark the concrete where the outer edge of the attenuator base should rest. Place a chalk line to snap a line on the concrete to show the outer edge of the attenuator base. You will need to safely unload the SCI100GM. Use a lifting device that can safely lift the 3,500-pound attenuator and move it into position. Lifting straps should be attached to the support frames that are clearly marked on support frames number 3 and 4. You should use a 4-point choked lifting method. Once the SCI100GM is safely off the truck, move it into position by aligning it to the markings on the concrete. The anchor bolt holes are very important to the system's integrity. They should be drilled with the unit in place to the depth specified in the installation manual. You may encounter rebar in the concrete, which will require a core drill or similar equipment. Once all of the holes are drilled, the holes should be cleaned by a suitable means. The dust needs to be removed or the epoxy may fail. Residual dust must also be removed by using a suitable method. Once the holes are clean, inject epoxy to approximately 2/3 of the hole's depth using trial and error to end up with the hole filled to the top once the bolt is inserted. Insert an anchor bolt with a nut and washer in place. Turn the inserted bolt at least 1 revolution to thoroughly coat the threads with the epoxy. You will have to torque these bolts down once the epoxy reaches its proper cure strength. You will need to repeat this process for all remaining anchor bolts. If a transition is required, our transitions attach to the back of the SCI100GM with 4 bolts. The other end depends on the object you are attaching to. Finally, the front panel may need to be striped according to state specifications and usage. These stripes will be easier to place on the panel if it is removed, so you can use a utility knife to cut out the holes. There are 4 bolts on this plate for easy removal and replacement. A final inspection should be performed next. Make sure the sled is all the way forward up to the stop bolts. The cable should be taut but not over-tightened. Next, a routine bolt inspection should be performed to make sure that none of the bolts loosened during transit. After the epoxy has cured, finish torque the anchor bolts to 125 foot-pounds. The SCI100GM is ready to be put into service. Resetting, inspection, and repairs. The 2 types of impacts that can occur to a redirective crash attenuator are side impacts and front impacts. Side impact inspection and repair. Side impacts may only need a thorough inspection and some cleaning of the attenuator. First, you should check all of the side panels and side panel bolts, as well as the shear bolts. If you see any damage, these parts should be replaced. Next, inspect the support frames. You should not see any evidence of cracking or bending. Pay careful attention to the upstops that hold the frames to the channel. The side guide bolts should be removed and inspected in the general impact area. These upstops experience the full impact of the vehicle both laterally and vertically. They should not be bent or show damage. The support frames can be easily removed by removing the upstop and side panel bolts. If a side panel must be replaced, you will have to remove the 4 sidekeeper bolts. Then you can slide out the side panel. There are 3 sidekeeper bolts. The winged keeper goes on the sled panel because it sustains the highest impact velocity and has more surface area. The taper on one side matches the sled panel taper. All of the center panels have a collar that is designed to pin the side panels to the mobile frames. However, the sidekeeper that goes in the last terminal brace has a shorter collar because it does not pin a panel to the mobile frame. The sidekeeper bolt collar rides in the slot on the outboard side panel. This collar pins the side panel on the inside to the support frame. Be sure to seat the collar into the side panel slot. Also, remember that the tapered trailing edge of a panel always goes on the outside when you replace the panel. Our front sled unit is very sturdy. Inspect the sled frame for any damage, then check the rollers that hold it on the channels. If there is damage, the sled should be replaced. To remove the sled, you will have to remove the side panels by removing 6 bolts, and you will have to remove the front stop bolts. Once these bolts are removed, you can lift the panel off. Next, disconnect the spelter socket. You can drive out the pin from the side of the unit, and when it is loose, you can reach in and remove it. Now you can slide the sled off the front of the channels, and then you can put the new sled back in position. That is a complete inspection and repair for a side impact. The front impact is always more laborious to repair in any attenuator. The frontal impact resetting starts with disconnecting the spelter socket as discussed earlier. Once this is done, you should attach a strap or chain to the bottom horizontal tube on the front of the sled and pull the unit out to the stop bolts in the channel. You will need a vehicle with sufficient power and traction. Remove the cover plates on the cylinder sheave assemblies. When you take the covers off, you will see the 2 outer anti-rotation pins, and you will need to remove them. The center pin stays in because it holds the sheaves in place and allows them to rotate. The SCI100GM can be reset very quickly by industry standards by making sure that you know a couple of important facts. First, we have 2 shear bolts in the mobile sheave assembly at the front of the cylinder. After these bolts get sheared off, the remnants must be removed before you try to pull the cylinder and sheaves out. A ripping bar works well for this procedure. The second tip we want you to know is that the cable produces extreme heat. The zinc coating on the cable can attach itself to the sheaves when it cools. After you disconnect the spelter socket, you should take a couple of pry bars and work around the sheaves to make sure the cable is moving freely. Depending on the severity of the impact, you should then move to the back bottom cylinder sheave and then the front mobile bottom sheave following the cable until you see that the cable is moving freely. After the cable is moving freely, you should inspect the cable for any damage. You should read the installation manual for exact procedures on determining whether the rope will pass this inspection. Next, run a chain or strap under the sled, back to the front mobile sheave assembly, and attach it to the pin shackle supplied with the front mobile sheaves. Pull out the mobile sheaves, making sure that the spelter socket is traveling freely back to the front sled. Take your time on this procedure, as you may have to guide the spelter socket over the support gussets. When the spelter socket gets close to the front sled, reattach it to the sled, because the cable may be too tight if you perform this procedure last. Next, you should continue pulling on the mobile sheaves until you can replace the shear bolts in the front cylinder sheave assembly. Performing this after you have the spelter socket attached will let you put some tension on the cable. Reinstall the anti-rotation pins in the sheaves. You will need to line up the holes for the pins to be reinserted. There are 5 locations that these pins must go through. When the pins are flush with the center pin, you can put the cover plates back in position. Check the cable to see that it is taut. The cable adjuster eye bolt can be used to slacken or to tighten the cable during or after resetting. Inspect all of the anchor bolts, side panels, and other parts for damage. Inspect the cylinder for any dents or signs of damage. Once you have completed a thorough final inspection, you are now done with your repair, and the unit is ready to be put back into service. Please refer to your owner's manual for additional information.